economic growth. Economic growth has a really basic definition. What it says is that over a period of time, and we're not talking about days or weeks here, we're talking about years, we have a growth in real GDP per capita. Real GDP per capita grows over time. What's that mean? Well, it means that we're producing more goods and services per person. We have more things per person who lives in our economy. Which means that it's possible for everybody to have more stuff. It's likely that it won't get split up evenly, that some people will get more than others, but it's possible for everyone to have more. President Kennedy, that's him down in the corner, President Kennedy said, when asked how we should deal with poverty, his statement was, when the tide comes in, all ships rise. In other words, if we can make the economy grow, we can split stuff up, and everybody will end up with more. The best way to make the economy succeed, make people succeed, isn't to take money from one group and give it to another. It's to make the tide come in. But he also said this, if a free society cannot help the many who are poor, it cannot save the few who are rich. And starting with Kennedy, but he was actually assassinated before it went into effect, so Johnson did it. We started a whole bunch of programs like school lunch programs and things that are designed to help deal with poverty in the United States. So back again, we always like to do these things this way. We go back and we start with our buddy Adam Smith and our other buddy David Ricardo here. They had a very simple theory of how we made the economy grow, which today we refer to as neoclassical theory because we've added math to it. But essentially their theory was that savings creates investment, which creates growth. So remember that the trick, and we've talked about this before, the trick is that we need a lot of capital. To make labor valuable, we need capital. So we need to increase the amount of capital in our country to make our country richer over time. Remember that the classical economists believed that savings always equaled investment. So if we increase savings, we're going to get a corresponding growth in investment. And that means more capital stock in our country, more machines, more factories, more jobs, more growth. You can see this in other people running around that time. You can see a penny saved is a penny earned, which is a famous Ben Franklin quote that essentially classical economics, it's savings that over time is going to generate income. So we give up consumption right now in exchange for more in the future. So we might get 10% less today, but if we get 20 or 30% in the future, we're going to be better off over time. It appears that just focusing on savings isn't what we need to think about when we think about growth, that it's actually a more complex subject than that. Modern economists have highlighted the importance of innovations and invention to growth, that the countries that grow the fastest tend to be countries that are coming up with new ideas and new inventions and new companies, and that's the key to growth. Now, it's not that savings doesn't matter, but we need to remember that we live in a world where savings moves. During the 2000s, $800 or $900 billion a year of foreign savings was flowing into the United States. It went into, as we talked about in an earlier chapter, it went into some bad investments, but savings is free to move to where the investments are. If we can come up with new technologies for people to invest in, then our country will boom over time. If that savings flows here and ends up building houses and causing a housing crisis, then it's not so effective. But again, We need the money. So savings should move toward the most profitable investments, and hopefully those investments will be things that will create a long-term structure that builds jobs and employment and income. Okay? The most important thing then from this, if that's really the theory, is that how well we educate our population is the most important thing. Underlying all of economic growth would be the quality of our education system, which there was a time in the 60s where the United States was the #1 best educated population on earth, and last time we looked, we were something like 38th. We just don't do that well at math and science anymore, and if we actually believe our theories, then that bodes very poorly for the United States in the future. So what stops countries from growing? And again, we're mostly here talking about developed countries. We're mostly here talking about the United States or Europe or Japan. The world, if you are, and we'll mention this briefly here, the world, if you are Mali or Vietnam or Honduras, your picture of the world is different than the United States' picture of the world. And economists tend to separate those two things out. So we talk about economic growth, and then we talk about something called development, which means countries that are less developed. So the barriers at any level, the barriers to economic growth, we just talked about one, which is education. If you don't have a well-educated population, it's hard for countries to grow. They can't get the new ideas. People don't want to put factories there. They can't get the workforce. We even see this in the United States, that economic growth in the United States over the past 15 years has been strongest where? Well, it's strongest in California and Texas and New York and Georgia and Florida. It's strong in states that have very strong and very well-developed higher education infrastructures. We need quality education for there to be growth. We also need infrastructure. Countries that grow tend to have roads that are functional, and we can take something in a truck in California and you're about 100% certain that you can get in that truck and drive it to New York without any difficulty. There are countries in the world where that's not true. We need that infrastructure of housing and roads and all of that, which doesn't exist really in some parts of the world. So then we have cultural problems, more likely to exist in other parts of the world than in the United States, but definitely exists here in some parts of the United States. The United Nations says that the biggest problem most countries have in terms of their economic growth is how they treat women. As you may know, here in 2018, there's women in Saudi Arabia were first given the chance to drive. If you take half of your population and you don't let them go to school, or you don't let them drive, you don't let them be pilots, you don't let them fully engage in the economy, that's going to be a problem. The culture has to value education. It has to value all the people. If you have a big class division in society, if you have separation of men and women into what they can do, that's going to have a big negative impact. And then in large parts of the world, we have a corruption problem. We have the problem that the governments aren't stable, that governments come and go, that people function in the government by bribes, or, we give a country money and then that money ends up in somebody's Swiss bank account. If a company wants to invest in a country and they can't trust that their investment is safe, they're not going to invest. So we need good, stable, again, you look at the countries that have grown and are rich, they have not always great governments, but they have governments that have been around a long time. You look at the United States or France or England or Japan, you have consistency in how those countries function over a really long period of time. So the United States, what do we need to do to keep growing and growing strong? We need to put more effort into our education system, get a better educational system, improve K through 12, make sure higher ed is caring about its students and doing a good job, make sure that students come out of K-12 prepared to go into the workforce or prepared to go into higher education. We need to invest in infrastructure. We need our roads and bridges and our airports and our internet infrastructure, all that stuff to be good. And then we need to push research. You see China, for example, their government spent something like $25 billion just last year doing research on green technologies and artificial intelligence and a couple other areas that they've decided that they want to be the best in the world at, batteries, electric cars. If the new idea is the United States was by far the world's largest producer of patents, China is rapidly catching up with us. They're not that far behind us now. The United States was at one point getting more than 90% of all of the money going to new research projects in the world, and we're not even at 50% now. So the education system, infrastructure, and research, is clear that we've slipped, the United States has slipped, and that we need to rebuild that to keep our economic growth strong. All right, so freedom matters in all of this. You have to be free to sit in your dorm room one morning, wake up and go, hey, we need to figure out how to search the internet better, and turn yourself into billionaires. Free societies generate more innovation, more invention, and should over time generate more economic growth. And you can look at China and go, hey, that's not a free society, and yeah, it's not. But there's a difference between that short-term economic growth and whether or not they can sustain that over time as their society becomes richer. And we shall see. But economists in general believe that free societies do better than government-dominated societies. And here we are, ready for the last chapter.